Greetings everyone, welcome to video number 34 in the project management series presented by Process Geekoid. Today's agenda will be going over reviewing the PMBOK process table as well as the 31st process, which is the plan communication management process. This process occurs at the intersection of the communication knowledge area and the planning process group. As always, please subscribe, like, and comment. So let's move forward. So as project managers, we spend 90% of our time communicating in various dimensions. So it's a no-brainer we need to plan accordingly to meet our stakeholder needs. There are various dimensions of communications, and these activities are included here. We have internal, external communication. So internal communication within the project, external communication with our customer, vendors, and other projects, organizations, and even to the public. Then you have formal communication through the use of reports, meeting minutes, and briefings, and informal communication through the use of emails, memos, and ad hoc discussions using Skype or various other tools out there. Then you have vertical, which is communication between various departments within the organization from the CEO down the company. That's why it's up and down the organization. So if a CEO issues a directive, that information will go from the CEO down to the CFO down to the various other departments such as IT and HR. Then you have horizontal, which is information between your peers within the same department or sister departments. For example, CFO might have accounting teams or enterprise money movement teams. So these teams will be your horizontal forms of communication. Then you have official forms of communication through the use of newsletters, annual reports, and unofficial communication through the use of off-the-record communication, such as just having meetings, side conversations. Then you have written and oral and verbal, voice inflections, and non-verbal communication through the use of body language, because that will tell you a lot about. That's why having meetings is very helpful in a project, so you can understand who your stakeholders are, what they're looking for, and how they interact. That'll give you a clear idea as who is supporting you and who is against you, and then go from there to influence the stakeholders to get buy-in and go from there. Then you have project communications management includes the processes that are required to ensure timely and appropriate planning, communication, collection, creation, distribution, storage, retrieval, management, control, monitoring, and ultimate disposition of project information thoroughly communicated. So we'll be going over plan communication management in this video. The two other processes in communication is managed communications, which is in the executing process group. Then you have control communications in the monitor and control process group. Then you have, now for the ITTOs, for plan communication management process are shown here. For inputs, we have project management plan, stakeholder register, because you need to make sure that you have all your stakeholders accounted for. Then you have EEFs, which are things outside of the project team's control, such as tools that you're allowed to use. So for some companies, using social media like Twitter and obviously Facebook are not allowed, but some companies might have business versions of these tools, such as SharePoint sites, and it depends on the organization's discretion as to what tools you can use, and as a team you have to adapt to that. Then you have organizational process assets, which are internal policies and procedures that are, for example, newsletters, templates for us to communicate through, such as meeting minute templates. Then you have basically corporate templates, also templates used to communicate with your vendors. Then you have tools and techniques, communication requirements analysis. This is where we're talking specifically about the stakeholder communication channels formula, where you have n times n minus 1 divided by 2, where it shows the number of potential communication channels or paths needed for a project with n stakeholders. And keep in mind that the n stakeholders could include you and the stakeholders, because you as a project manager is a stakeholder. You are a project manager and you are a stakeholder because you're impacted by the project. So in the exam there will be trick questions. So if it says 5 stakeholders including the project manager, then you just plug in 5 in this formula and chug away and get your answer. If it says 5 plus the project manager, that means you have to have 6 for the number in here. And basically that formula is very important to understand, and make sure you read the questions carefully. The other variation of this formula is where you have n minus 1. That basically is where one person has the number of channels with the rest of the group. So if there is basically, let's say you have 5 stakeholders that you are communicating with, then that means you would exclude yourself, and basically it would be 5 minus 1, n minus 1. So it'll be 4 channels that you are communicating with, or 4 other stakeholders. So you have 4 paths with one person. So that's basically the other variation of the formula. And basically, sources of information typically used to identify and define project communication requirements include org charts, project organization stakeholder responsibility relationships, disciplines, departments, and specialties involved in the project. And then you have logistics of how many persons will be involved with the project at which locations, internal information needs when communicating within the organization, external information needs when communicating with the media, public, or contractors. There are specific rules around that, so you want to follow your organizational process assets accordingly. Then you have stakeholder information and communication requirements from within the stakeholder register. So those are the requirement analysis. Then you have communication technology as your next tool and technique. And basically you are going to have things like having email, that's oftenly used. Then you have Skype for business. Then you have Skype meetings, and Viber, and various other tools out there. The most commonly used are like Cisco Web Connect meetings and various other tools out there. Every company has their rules. So basically these are tools where you are trying to communicate more effectively and efficiently with a larger audience, and with technology you have virtual teams scattered over the globe. So factors that can affect the choice of communication technology include, of course, urgency of the need of information, the availability of the technology, ease of use, project environment, and sensitivity and confidentiality of the information. You want to make sure that the information goes to who it's supposed to go to and not to unauthorized parties. And in an era of social media, there are policies that might prohibit you to use it. So please do not do that at work. Otherwise you might land yourself in hot water. Other tools here are communication models. As we saw here, the most common model you'll be tested on is the sender-receiver model, where the sender is basically encrypting the message and transmits it over, and then the receiver will decode it and understand the message. Otherwise they go back and forth until the message has been understood. So basically the sender will encode the message in the language of the receiver receives it and decodes the message, and hopefully they understand it. Otherwise they'll go back to the sender and ask for clarification. That's why you have a constant feedback loop. As you can see, it goes back and forth. And if you have noise or unnecessary information, that noise is going to create issues in understanding the message. So make sure your message is clear as possible. So that's the most important communication model. You'll be tested on that. And also, next tool and technique, of course, is meetings. That's the most common one. So we talked about the methods. Methods basically you have interactive method using meetings, phone calls, instant messaging, video conferencing. Then you have push communication method, where information is distributed but doesn't ensure it actually is reached to who it was intended for or was understood. So basically letters, memos, press releases, emails, voicemails, faxes, and reports. So as a project manager, you might email everybody and in the team, but not everyone's gonna, you don't assume that everyone has read it unless you have a read receipt, but even then you can't force them to read the email if they don't have buy-in. The best way to get buy-in to your project is through the use of meetings and keep them in the loop through emails and constant follow-ups with them to make sure that you are on target with your project. So that is one form of communication. Then you have pull. Pull communication is used for large volumes of information and large audiences so they can access at their own discretion, such as internet sites, e-learning, lessons learned database, knowledge repositories, and basically they're pulling down the information from a software or a server using their username and password. And those are the tools including your meetings. So that covers tools and techniques. Now for outputs, we've got communication management plan, where you have stakeholder communication requirements, information to be communicated such as language, format, content, and level of detail, reason for distribution of the information, the time frame and frequency for the information to be sent out, the person responsible for communicating the information, and the person responsible for authorizing release of confidential information. This information about authorization can all be part of a RACI matrix that might help you as to who's responsible for what in the communication pipeline. Then you have project document updates, which are updates to the project schedule and stakeholder register. So the key benefit of planning for communication management is it identifies and documents the approach to communicate most effectively and efficiently with stakeholders. And just as a refresher again, I would like to go over the communication requirements analysis, specifically the formula n times n-1 divided by 2, also n-1 formula. Basically, this formula here you see in this slide shows that you have, for 5 stakeholders, there are 10 communication channels. That would include you as a project manager as one of the stakeholders, unless it is explicitly stated. So 5 times 5 minus 1 is 4. 5 times 4 is 20, divided by 2 is 10. So that's why you have 10 communication channels. So keep in mind that let's say it had n is 6 stakeholders including yourself, then you just plug in 6 in here and it would be 15 channels and so on. The other formula is n-1. Basically that is where the number of channels between one person and the rest of the group. So here we have 5 stakeholders. So if it's just n-1, that means for you would have 4 other channels to communicate with. 5 minus 1 is 4. So that means you have 4 other communication channels excluding yourself. So you have 4 channels to communicate with. That's the other variation of this formula. And that is all I have for today's lecture. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment. Have a great day. Thank you.